Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to this new edition of Business Africa. I am Dea Yoka, the top stories. This week we're talking about Made in Africa. We'll focus particularly on the fashion industry, which is buzzing. We look at why this ecosystem has all it takes to join the sector's global champions. During the 7th edition of the Africa Energy Marketplace in Angola, the African Development Bank pledged funds to help African countries improve access to electricity. Finally, we'll head to Saudi Arabia, where the Global Cybersecurity Forum brought together experts from all over the world to work on the same question: how to establish common priorities in cyberspace. Africa's fashion and design sector is brimming with opportunities and unique know-how. Yet it is in its infancy as to how to establish a reliable value chain. What are the challenges African designers and artisans face? We find out.
A boom in fashion, crafts and everything made in Africa. A phenomenon driven by the rise of the middle class, but also by a young and growing population, as well as rapid urbanization. In recent years, Africa has experienced rapid growth in the digital sector, facilitating intra-African trade for a population determined to redefine the image of the continent in the eyes of the world. In addition to being financial and commercial hubs, cities like Lagos, Dakar, Johannesburg, Abidjan and Casablanca stand out as fashion and design hubs. On the continent, 32 countries organize fashion weeks to promote the textile sector regionally and internationally. But like others, this area is not without challenges. Made in Africa is still struggling to reach its full potential due to a certain number of obstacles. In its latest report, published at the end of October and dedicated to the fashion sector in Africa, UNESCO mentions in particular the difficulty for designers to source quality raw materials at an affordable price. In its study, 59% of the artisans and creators questioned put the lack of public and private investment at the top of the main constraints to the development of the sector. Next comes the lack of training, followed by the cost and availability of local textiles and the lack of infrastructure. Africa imports $23.1 billion worth of shoes, clothing and textiles each year from the United States, but also exports $15.5 billion of these products, representing a trade deficit of $7.6 billion.
To dive deeper into the subject, we're joined by Nelly Wande. She's an expert in luxury and African artistic professions. Welcome to Business Africa, Nelly Wande. Besides the lack of investment, what are the main challenges you face when promoting African creations?
It seems to me that the first challenge is the coordination within the ecosystem. For example, during a fashion week in Paris, when several African designers come to Paris, how can we ensure a better impact of these designers on the Parisian market? Once we've mentioned that, of course, one of the major barriers today is that ecosystems are not structured enough to meet a significant international demand. We can clearly see that in the past decade, the world has discovered Africa along with a new form of creativity. So how do we meet this demand when we're in local African markets that are not well structured in terms of intellectual property protection for local creations and in terms of international support? These are the aspects that seem to me to be the most critical to address in form of change today. Of course, it is difficult to achieve all this without funding.
UNESCO suggests strengthening legal protections for designers and improving the transmission of skills and know-how to grow the sector. What policies would you recommend?
One of the sectors today that seems completely neglected is education and creativity. We shouldn't view the fashion sector as a closed system. We should see it as integrated into overall development. Ultimately, I think that once we've mentioned the need for vertical integration, the value chain and financing, we need laws that promote efficient trade between African countries themselves. When we look at the trade deficit in African textile and accessory sectors today, it is estimated at $1 billion. So that's where the potential lies for African businesses.
We can see it. African cultures keep inspiring many of the world's biggest brands. Some of them are already well established. How can African designers then stand out from their competitors?
It is true that we tend to forget that the creativity sector is a business sector. This is why we have the feeling today that large international brands may have a better chance to present themselves to the world, sometimes because they have the means to promote popular African culture that is now found in all major international capitals. Once culture has entered the public domain, it no longer belongs to anyone. There are mechanisms to protect cultural assets and territorial productions, but these are things that have not been put in place, and it also involves government. We cannot expect everything from the private sector and entrepreneurs because government must promote, protect and support creators internationally.
Madam Wanje, thank you for answering our questions.
Thank you very much.
The Africa Energy Marketplace was held in Luanda under the theme Accelerating Reforms and Increasing Investments in the Energy Sector. Angola's government presented on the occasion its electrification project for the coming years. Luanda, Angola's capital, hosted the 7th edition of the Africa Energy Marketplace, an event organized by the African Development Bank. The goal of the collaborative investment platform is to light up and power the continent as outlined in the AFDB's 5 strategic priorities, the High Fives. Main actors of the sector convened under the theme Accelerating Reforms and Increasing Investment in the Energy Sector. They presented solutions to address the main challenges that slow down investment. During the one-day event, Angola's government detailed its electrification project. It aims to scale up access to electricity to half of the country's population by 2027. Regarding the future, we've presented our objectives. We aim to bring the percentage of the population with access to electricity to 50%. That will require that we ramp up investment in the transmission line and in the distribution network, which means we'll invest approximately $17 million during the next few years. To back Angola and other countries, the AFDB seeks to invest $100 billion a year in Africa. Kevin Kariuki, the group's vice president for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth, said. The good news comes as Angola's Minister of Energy and Water stressed that the participation of private capital was fundamental to the growth of the energy sector. Computing is everywhere. This renders cybersecurity essential for companies and countries. The Global Cybersecurity Forum 2023 aims to broaden the discussion on the challenges and opportunities of this interconnection of computers. We have more.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to Riyadh for the 2023 Global Cybersecurity Forum. To come together as a
the 3rd edition of the Global Cybersecurity Forum opened against a backdrop of a growing threat for businesses in Africa, where there has been a surge in cybercrime across the continent. A recent operation by Interpol and Afripol across 25 African countries identified over 20,000 suspicious cyber networks.
The threat of cybercrime and cybersecurity in Africa is huge. Interpol works a great deal in the Africa region. We have conducted 2 threat assessments in the last 2 years, identifying the top threats being digital extortion, banking, phishware, malware, ransomware. These attacks are very prevalent. Business email compromise is huge, not only affecting the Africa continent, but a lot of cyber threat actors are operating in the African continent at this point.
Despite the warnings and concern for the future, there are still positives. And as governments and businesses in Africa grapple with the evolving threats, Interpol believes that now is the time to turn these challenges into opportunities.
Countries in Africa can certainly turn this into an opportunity. I think more work needs to be done between businesses with law enforcement. I think there's always a hesitation to bring in law enforcement into the discussion, but it's critically important, especially for attribution purposes, to find perpetrators behind the attacks. We need companies to work hand in hand with law enforcement, and that's the only way that we're going to make real progress.
Leading global cybersecurity expert Dr. Marco Gurka agrees and adds that cybersecurity and the digital world could lead to significant job creation.
For Africa, just like for any other continent, the challenges that we're facing right now can be the opportunity of the future. So we've seen this in some part of the world. We had the former president of Estonia speaking today. They have been hit by cyber attacks, and they have developed a really robust cybersecurity industry. So we're seeing opportunities now. So cybersecurity is a great opportunity. It's the opportunity to work basically in any place in the world because we're using the same technology.
Africa's current challenges could be the catalyst for future global cybersecurity industry growth, fostering opportunities across continents worldwide.
That wraps up this episode of Business Africa. You can watch it again on Africanews.com and on all our platforms. I'll see you soon.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.